Okay, so now I exit, I'm back to primary. And let's talk about permissions now. Oh yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So actually I'm going to go back to being Brian because that was a fun experience. So again, I'm here as Brian. And where am I? Let's go to users, not users, home / Ubuntu. Okay, so I'm inside of Ubuntu's home directory, and you can see here this is all owned by Ubuntu. So if I try and, for example here, I try to vi another file.txt. So I vi another file.txt. Notice down here it says read only. Why is that? Well, it's because Brian doesn't have access to the ability to read and write inside of Ubuntu's directory. So if I come in here and I try and say, it even says changing a read-only file, and then I come down here and say write quit, it's going to say, I told you like 7 times this is read-only. This is read-only is because you don't have any permissions to read or write here. So what I'll have to do here is say quit with an exclamation point and say quit without saving. Okay. And let's talk about why that is. If you look here at another file.txt, this is the one that we were looking at. This little like hieroglyphics that we have right here, these are the permissions of the file. So the first one, this is whether it's a special file or a normal file. If it's a dash, it's a normal file. So that's just like a text file or a JavaScript file or a Python file or a PNG. It's just really any flat file. But if it has something else like D, for example, that means it's a directory, right? So home here means it's a folder, right? That's what that D means. There's a handful of other ones. I think I wrote them down here. There's like binary files. There's a bunch of other stuff that doesn't really matter. The only two that really you see a whole lot of are normal files and directory files. Let's see. The next RWX, that is the, yeah, so these are all file permissions. So you'll notice it says RWX, 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 right? So I'm trying to make sure that I read it the correct way. Yeah, so the first one is the user permissions, right? So RWX here means that this can be read, written to, or executed by Ubuntu. So it's the specific user that's listed here, okay? The next RWX here is the group. So this means that this file can be read, written, or executed by anyone in the Ubuntu, that's the Ubuntu user, or anyone that's in the Ubuntu group. These just happen to be named the same thing, they don't have to be, right? This could be like the readers group or something like that. The last R-X here is the everyone else group. So in this is a directory, right? So this means that anyone that's not either in the group or this user can read from it, they can execute it, but they cannot write to it. So again, let's look here, there's another file.tar, or sorry, not another file.txt, this one right here. It's a flat file. This can be read to or written to by the user. It cannot be executed. This can be read to or written to, but it cannot be executed by the group. And it can be read by everyone else, but it can't be read or executed by anyone else. So that's what that means. Make sense so far? So that's why Brian cannot read or cannot write to another file.txt. It's because Brian can read it. Brian has our permissions here from the other, right? But he cannot write to it because he doesn't have any permissions to do that. I'll talk about the X, the can execute later, but basically means like if it's like a binary file or like a command, it can be ran as a command. So like ls, right? So if we look at ls-las/bin, you'll notice that all of these have X permissions, right? So like tar, that's one we've been using, right? It means anyone can execute from it. But like, for example, Brian can't write to tar here. Does that make sense? Okay. So where am I? Let's go back to this dot right here. This top one represents the directory that we're in this moment in time, which means that it's owned by Ubuntu and the Ubuntu group. And Brian does not have write permissions on this folder. So if I try and do touch brian.txt, it's going to say Brian can't write here. Now I absolutely could say sudo touch brian.txt, but then who is going to own the file? So if I have brian.txt now, look who owns it. Root. Root owns it. And what's even kind of, more insulting is that not even Ubuntu can now read or write to this, because you'll see here that there's only read permissions for anyone besides the root user. I'll go ahead and remove that. Actually, we can keep rolling with that. All right, well, yeah. So let's talk about like ways that we can kind of mitigate this. I'm going to exit this out of this, so I'm going to be now as Ubuntu. Let's go ahead and go to the root directory. We kind of already talked about this a little bit. I want to make a hello, but I can't do that as Ubuntu. So instead what I'll do is I'll make a directory, I'll sudo make a directory. So now I have a hello directory here, but this is owned by root. What happens if I want Ubuntu to be able to read and write to this? So I can use something called, I'll go inside a hello here, right? And I can't even still touch hello.txt. Ubuntu cannot read and write into this hello directory. So what I want to do is I'm going to say sudo change ownership. So that's what chown, or chown, if you want to say it that way. Don't say it that way. I can change the ownership from root to Ubuntu like this. And again, that's the Ubuntu user and the Ubuntu group. Those could be different names. And then I want to change that to /hello. So now if I look at the user permissions here, you'll see that Ubuntu owns this now. So now, again, I'm Ubuntu, I can say touch hello.txt, and now it works because Ubuntu actually owns this directory now and can do whatever they want there. So that's when you'll see change ownership a lot. You'll be changing ownership probably from the root directory or root user to a user. Because again, like I can't, if I say su Brian, Brian can't write here, right? So this would be like one opportunity that you could like make a directory that only one user can write to and then no one else can. Does that make sense about permissions for users? So this is one way of going about this. You can like scope it down to users, but you can also change the, so let's take a look at this hello.txt that I just created here. This has read permissions for everybody, but only Ubuntu user or Ubuntu group people can write to it. What if I want to make it so anybody can write to this file and it doesn't really matter who owns it? You can use something called chmod. What I can actually end up doing here is I'm going to say sudo chmod. So I'm going to change the permissions on the file, and I'm going to say u equals uw or rw, g equals rw, and I think it's O. Yeah, O equals RW. So the O stands for other. So user, group, other for hello.txt. So now if I look at this again, you can see now anybody can read and write to this. So if I switch users to Brian now, and I say, touch Brian.txt, one, don't touch me. Absolutely don't touch me. But you can touch this folder. I gave you permissions to touch the folder. So if I say touch Brian.txt, now do you think this is going to work? No. Why is that? Oh, so Brian didn't get to the directory. Brian got permissions to the file. But so I can say vi hello.txt, and I can say, hello, this was written by Brian, write quit. Oh yeah, write quit exclamation point, because it doesn't have permissions in the directory. But now I can say exit, and I can come back out here, and I can cat hello.txt, and look, that was actually written out by Brian. Make sense? Cool. So if I wanted to do that by the directory as well, I could absolutely come in here and say change mod for that, and instead of changing it for the file, I can just put period to represent this directory, or /hello if you want to be more verbose, but I'm just going to put period. And now, oh, yeah, you have to give it X for directories as well. So come in here and you have to add X for the directory for hello. And now if you go into hello, you can see I can switch users into Brian, and I can say touch Brian.txt, and now it will allow Brian to create the file in here. You can take a look, and you can see that we created Brian.txt, and this is owned by Brian, despite the fact that this is a directory owned by Ubuntu. Make sense? So that's what change chmod is for. It's messing with those permissions for groups and users. I'll be honest, I almost always am just adding permissions to a file. Like usually it's either adding an executable permission or making it more permissive or less permissive for users. But I don't really modify the group permissions very much because I don't usually mess too much with group permissions.